I back off. Upward toward the mere the goat will never reach. I smile, threatened by an animal already dead, still climbing. I snatch up a stone and hurl it. It smashes his mouth, spraying out teeth, and penetrates to the jugular. He drops to his knees, gets up again. The air is sweet with the scent of his blood. Death shakes his body the way high wind shakes trees. He climbs toward me. I snatch up a stone. At dusk, I watch men go about their business in the towns of the Scyldings. Boys and dogs drive the horses and oxen to the river, and break through the ice to let them drink. Back at the barns, men carry in hay on wooden forks, dump grain in the mangers, and carry out manure. A wheelwright and his helper squat in their dark room, hammering spokes into a hub. I listen to the grunt, the blow of the hammer, the grunt, the blow, like the sound of a leaky heart. Smells of cooking. Grey wood smoke rises slowly toward a lead-grey sky. On the rocky cliffs, looking out to sea, Hrothgar's watchmen, each man posted several stones' throws away from the next, sit huddled in furs on their horses' backs, or stand in the shelter of an outcropping ledge, rubbing their hands together, stamping their feet. No one will strike at the kingdom from the sea. Icebergs drift a mile out, grinding against one another from time to time, letting out a low moan like the sigh of some huge sea-beast. The guards watch anyway, obedient to orders the king has forgotten to cancel. People eat, leaning over their food together, seldom talking. The lamp at the center of the table lights their eyes. Dogs beside the men's legs wait, looking up from time to time. And the girl who brings the food from the stove stands looking at the wall as she waits for the plates to empty. An old man, finished before the rest, goes out to bring in wood. I spy on an old woman telling lies to children. Her face is dark with some disease, and the veins on the backs of her hands are ropes. She is too old to sweep or cook. She tells of a giant across the sea who has the strength of 30 thanes. Some day he will come here, she tells the children. Their eyes widen. A bald old man looks up from his earthenware plate and laughs. A grey dog pushes against his leg. He kicks it. The sun stays longer each day now, climbing, mechanical as a goat, off the leaden horizon. Children slide down the hills on shaped boards, sending their happy cries through drifted stillness. As twilight deepens, their mothers call them in. A few feign deafness. A shadow looms over them, mine, and they're gone forever. So it goes. Darkness. At the house of the Shaper, people come and go, solemn-faced, treading softly, their heads bowed and their hands folded for fear of sending dreadful apparitions through his dreams. His attendant, the boy who came here with him, a grown man now, sits by the old man's bed and plays pale runs on the old man's harp. The old man turns his blind head, rising from confusion, to listen. He asks about a certain woman who does not come. No answer. But the king comes, with the queen on his arm. Young Hrothulf, walking 4 steps behind them, holding the hands of their children. The king sits beside the Shaper's bed as he sits in the hall, motionless, his patient eyes staring. Hrothulf and the children wait out in the entry-room. The queen puts her fingertips gently on the old man's forehead. The shaper whispers for the lamp. The attendant pretends to bring it, though it stands already on the table beside his bed. "That's better," the queen says dutifully, and the king says, as if he couldn't see well before, "You look healthier today." The shaper says nothing. Crouched in the bushes beside the path, peeking in like a whiskered old voyeur, wet-lipped, red-eyed, my chest filled with some meaningless anguish, I watch the old man working up the nerve to let his heart stop. Where are all his fine phrases now? I whisper to the night. I chuckle. The night, as usual, doesn't comment. He sits motionless, propped up in bed, death-white hands folded on top of the covers. His eyes, once webbed with visions, are shut. The young man, the attendant, sitting with the harp, does not play. The king and queen wait, dutiful, probably counting the time off in their heads. And the herbalist, hump-backed, robed in black, a tick screws taut one whole side of his face. The herbalist, no longer useful to the one-time king of poets, paces back and forth slowly, rubbing his hands. He waits for the soft, dry throat rattle that will free him to go pace elsewhere. The shaper speaks. They bend closer. "I see a time," he says, "when the Danes once again—" His voice trails off. Puzzlement crosses his forehead, and one hand reaches up feebly as if to smooth it away, but forgets before it can find the forehead, and falls back to the covers. He lifts his head a little, listening for footsteps. There are none. The head drops back weakly. His visitors wait on. They do not seem to realize that he is dead. In another house, at a large carved table, a middle-aged woman with hair just slightly less red than the queen's, she has close-together eyes and eyebrows plucked neat as the lines of a knife wound, sits by lamplight listening, as he did, for footsteps. Her nobleman husband lies sleeping in a nearby room, his head on his arm, as if listening to his heartbeat. She is a lady I have watched with the greatest admiration. Soul of fidelity, decorum. The shaper would tip his whitened head, blind eyes staring at the floor whenever the lady spoke. And from time to time, when he sang of heroes, of shipbacks broken, there was no mistaking that he sang the song for her. Nothing came of it. She would leave the hall on her husband's arm. The shaper would bow politely as she passed. She hears them coming. I duck back into the gloom to watch and wait. The messenger the shaper's attendant has sent goes up to the door, and has hardly knocked once, when the door opens inward and the lady appears, staring through him. "He's dead," says the messenger. The lady nods. When the messenger is gone, the lady comes out onto the steps and stands with her arms locked, expressionless. She looks up the hill toward the mead hall. "So all of us must sooner or later pass," I am tempted to whisper. "Alas! Woe!" I resist. Only the wind is alive, pressing her robe to her fat, loose hips and bosom. The woman is as still as the dead man in his bed. I am tempted to snatch her. How her squeals would dance on the icicle walls of the night! But I back away. I look in on the shaper one more time. The old women are arranging him, putting gold coins on his eyelids to preserve him from seeing where he goes. At last, unsatisfied as ever, I slink back home. In my cave, the tedium is worse, of course. My mother no longer shows any sign of sanity, hurrying back and forth, wall to wall, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, dark forehead furrowed like a new ploughed field, her eyes glittering and crazy as a captured eagle's. Each time I come in, she gets between me and the door, as if to lock me up with her forever. I endure it, for the time. When I sleep, she presses close to me, half buries me under her thistly fur and fat. "Dool, dool," she moans. She drools and weeps. "Warovish," she whimpers, and tears at herself. Hanks of fur come away in her claws. I see grey hide. I study her, cool and objective, in my corner, and because now the Shaper is dead, strange thoughts come over me. I think of the pastness of the past. How the moment I am alive in, prisoned in, moves like a slowly tumbling form through darkness, the underground river. Not only ancient history, the mythical age of the brothers' feud, but my own history 1 second ago has vanished utterly, dropped out of existence. King Shield's great deeds do not exist back there in time. Back there in time is an illusion of language. They do not exist at all. My wickedness 5 years ago, or 6, or 12, has no existence except as now, mumbling, sacrificing the slain world to the omnipotence of words. I strain my memory to regain it. I snatch by my wits a time when I was very small, and my mamma held me softly in her arms. Ah, how I loved you, mamma. Dead these many years. I snatch a time when I crouched outside the mead hall, hearing the first strange hymns of the Shaper. Beauty, holiness, how my heart rocked. He is dead. I should have captured him, teased him, tormented him, made a fool of him. I should have cracked his skull mid-song, and sent his blood spraying out wet through the mead hall like a shocking change of key. One evil deed missed is a loss for all eternity. I decide, naturally, to attend his funeral. She tries to prevent me. I lift her by the armpits as though she were a child, and gently I set her aside. Her face trembles, torn, I think, between terror and self-pity. It crosses my mind that she knows something, but she doesn't, I know. The future is as dark, as unreal as the past. Coolly, objectively, I watch the trembling. It's as if all the muscles are locked to the charge of an eel. Then I push her away. The face shatters. She whoops. I run to the pool and dive, and even now I can hear her. I will forget tomorrow, so her pain is a matter of indifference. And so, to the funeral. The Shaper's assistant, cradling the old man's polished harp, sings of Hawk and Hildebur and Hnaf and Hengist, how Finn's thanes fought with his wife's dear kinsman and killed King Hnaf, and a terrible thing ensued. When Finn had few men and his enemies had no king, they made a truce, and the terms were these, that Finn would be lord of the lordless Danes, because a king without men is a worthless thing, and thanes without a lord are exiles. Both sides made vows, swore the duty of peace, and so winter came in its time to the country of the Jutes. The people listened silent and solemn to the old shaper's song on the young man's lips, and the pyre where the old man lies stands waiting for fire. The dead arms are crossed, the features are stiff and blue, as if frozen. Ice glints on the sides of the pyre. The world is white. Young Hengist still through slaughtered dark winter stayed with Finn, heart sorrowing. He thought of home, though he could not drive on the dark sea his ring-proud ship. For the sea air rolled, dusky with wind, and the waves were locked in ice. Then another season came, another year, as the years do yet, bright shining weather awaiting its time. The winter was gone, earth's breast was fair, and the exiled Hengist was eager to go, unwilling guest, from the dwelling. Yet as ice chains locked the land, so Hengist's heart was locked. Revenge called harder to him than home. He cried in his mind for quarrel, and quarrel came. Then Finn lay down in blood, bold king with all his company, and the queen was taken. And, loaded with rings, King Finn could not refuse. The Danes sailed home. Men's double vows soon wash away. Spring rain drips down through rafters. So he sings, looking down, recalling and repeating the words, hands light on the harp. The king listens, dry-eyed, his mind far, far away. Prince Hrothulf stands with the children of Hrothgar and Wealhtheow, his features revealing no more secrets than does snow. Men light the pyre. Unferth stares at the flames with eyes like stones. I too watch the fire as well as I can. Colorless it seems, a more intense place in the brightness of snow and ice. It flames high at once as if hungry for the coarse, lean meat. The priests walk slowly around the pyre, saying antique prayers, and the crowd, all in black, ignoring the black priests, keens. I watch the burning head burst, bare of visions, dark blood dripping from the corner of the mouth and ear. End of an epoch, I could tell the king. We're on our own again, abandoned. I awaken with a start and imagine I hear the goat still picking at the cliff wall, climbing to the mere. Something groans far out at sea. My mother makes sounds. I strain my wits toward them, clench my mind. Beware the fish. I get up and walk, filled with restless expectation, though I know there is nothing to expect. I am not the only monster on these moors. I met an old woman as wild as the wind, striding in white out of midnight's den. Her cloak was in rags, and her flesh it was lean, and her eyes, her murdered eyes, scent of the dragon. I should sleep, drop war, till spring, as I normally do. When I sleep, I wake up in terror, with hands on my throat. A stupid business. Nihil ex nihilo, I always say. Chapter 11. I am mad with joy. At least I think it's joy. Strangers have come, and it's a whole new game. I kiss the ice on the frozen creeks. I press my ear to it, honoring the water that rattles below, for by water they came. The icebergs parted as if gently pushed back by enormous hands, and the ship sailed through, sea-eager, foamy-necked, white sails riding the swan road, flying like a bird. Oh, happy Grendel! 15 glorious heroes, proud in their battle dress, fat as cows. I could feel them coming as I lay in the dark of my cave. I stirred, baffled by the strange sensation, squinting into dark corners to learn the cause. It drew me as the mind of the dragon did once. "It's coming," I said. More clearly than ever I heard the muffled footsteps on the dome of the world, and even when I realized that the footsteps were nothing but the sound of my own heart, I knew more surely than before that something was coming. I got up, moved past stone icicles to the pool and the sunken door. My mother made no move to prevent me. At the pool, fire snakes shot away from me in all directions, bristling, hissing, mysteriously wrought up. They had sensed it too. That beat, steady, inhumanly steady, inexorable. And so, an hour before dawn, I crouched in shadows at the rocky sea-wall, foot of the giant's work. Low tide. Lead-grey water sucked quietly, stubborn and deliberate, at icy grey boulders. Grey wind teased leafless trees. There was no sound but the ice-cold surge, the cry of a gannet, invisible in greyness above me. A whale passed, long, dark shadow, 2 miles out. The sky grew light at my back. Then I saw the sail. I was not the only one who saw them coming. A lone Danish coast guard stood bundled in furs, his horse beside him, and he shaded his eyes against the glint of the icebergs beyond the sail, and watched the strangers come swiftly in toward land. The wooden keel struck sand and cut a gouge toward the boulders on the shore, a 40-foot cut, half the length of a ship. And then, quick as wolves, but mechanical, terrible, the strangers leaped down, and with stiff ice-crusted ropes as grey as the sea, the sky, the stones, they moored their craft. Their chain-mail rattled as they worked, never speaking, walking dead men, lashing the helm bar, lowering the sail, unloading ash spear shafts and battle-axes. The coast guard mounted, snatched up his spear, and rode loudly down to meet them. His horse's hooves shot sparks. I laughed. If they were here for war, the coast guard was a goner. "What are you, bearers of armour, dressed in mail coats, that have thus come riding your tall ship over the sea-road, winter-cold ocean, here to Daneland?" Thus spake the coast guard. Wind took his words and sent them tumbling. I bent double, soundlessly laughing till I thought I'd split. They were like trees, these strangers. Their leader was big as a mountain, moving with his forest toward the guard. Nevertheless, the Dane shook his spear the way attackers do when they're telling a man what they're going to do with his testicles. "Atta boy," I whisper. I shadowbox. "If they come at you, bite 'em in the leg." He scolded and fumed and demanded their lineage. They listened with folded arms. The wind blew colder. At last the coast guard's voice gave out. He bent over the pommel, coughing into his fist, and the leader answered. His voice, though powerful, was mild. Voice of a dead thing, calm as dry sticks and ice when the wind blows over them. He had a strange face that, little by little, grew unsettling to me. It was a face, or so it seemed for an instant, from a dream I had almost forgotten. The eyes slanted downward, never blinking, unfeeling as a snake's. He had no more beard than a fish. He smiled as he spoke, but it was as if the gentle voice, the childlike yet faintly ironic smile, were holding something back, some magician power that could blast stone cliffs to ashes as lightning blasts trees. "We're Geats," he said, "the hearth companions of King Higelac. You've heard of my father, a famous old man named Ecgtheow." His mind, as he spoke, seemed far away, as if, though polite, he were indifferent to all this, an outsider not only among the Danes, but everywhere. He said, "We've come as friends for a visit with your lord King Hrothgar, protector of the people." He tipped his head, pausing. You'd have thought he had centuries. At last, with a little shrug, he said, "Be so kind as to give us some advice, old man. We've come on a fairly important errand." The hint of irony in the smile grew darker, and he looked now not at the Coast Guard, but at the Coast Guard's horse. "A certain thing can't very well be kept hidden, I think. You'll know if it's true, as we heard back home, that I don't know what kind of enemy stalks your hall at night, kills men, so they say, and for some reason scorns your warriors. If it's so—" He paused, his eyebrows cocked, and glanced at the Coast Guard and smiled. "I've come to give Hrothgar advice." You could see pretty well what advice he'd give. His chest was as wide as an oven. His arms were like beams. "Come ahead," I whispered. "Make your play. Do your worst." But I was less sure of myself than I pretended. Staring at his grotesquely muscled shoulders, stooped, naked despite the cold, sleek as the belly of a shark, and as rippled with power as the shoulders of a horse, I found my mind wandering. If I let myself, I could drop into a trance just looking at those shoulders. He was dangerous. And yet I was excited, suddenly alive. He talked on. I found myself not listening, merely looking at his mouth, which moved, or so it seemed to me, independent of the words, as if the body of the stranger were a ruse, a disguise for something infinitely more terrible. Then the Coast Guard turned his horse, and led them up to where the stone-paved road began, grey as the sea, between snowbanks. "I'll have men guard your ship," he said. He pointed out the mead hall, high on its hill above the town. Then he turned back. The sea-pale eyes of the stranger were focused on nothing. He and his company went on, their weapons clinking, chain-mail jangling, solemn and ominous as drums. They moved like one creature, huge, strange machine. Sunlight gleamed on their helmets and cheek guards and flashed off their spear points, blinding. I did not follow. I stayed in the ruin, prowling where long-dead giants prowled, my heart aching to know what the strangers were doing now up at the mead hall. But it was daylight. I'd be a fool to go up and see. I couldn't tell, back in my cave, whether I was afraid of them or not. My head ached from staying too long in the sunlight, and my hands had no grip. It was as if they were asleep. I was unnaturally conscious, for some reason, of the sounds in the cave. The roar of the underground river, hundreds of feet below our rooms, reaming out walls, driving deeper and deeper. The centuries-old drip-drip of seepage building stalagmites. An inch in 100 years. The spatter of the spring 3 rooms away. The room of the pictures half buried in stone, where the spring breaks through the roof. Half awake, half asleep. I felt as if I were myself the cave, my thoughts coursing downward through my own strange hollows. Or some impulse older and darker than thought, as old as the mindless mechanics of a bear, the twilight meditations of a wolf, a tree. Who knows what all this means? Neither awake nor asleep, my chest filled with an excitement like joy. I tried to think whether or not I was afraid of the strangers, and the thought made no sense. It was unreal, insubstantial as spider-web strands blowing lightly across a window that looks out on trees. I have sometimes watched men do mysterious things. A man with a wife and 7 children, a carpenter with a fair reputation as wise, not maddened by passions, not given to foolishness, regular of habit, dignified in bearing, a dedicated craftsman, no edge unbeveled, no ragged peg, no gouge or split, once crept from his house at the edge of the town, while his family slept, and fled down snowy paths through woods to the house of a hunter away in search of game. The hunter's wife admitted him, and he slept with her until the second rooster crowed. Then he fled back home. Who knows why? Tedium is the worst pain. The mind lays out the world in blocks, and the hushed blood waits for revenge. All order, I've come to understand, is theoretical, unreal. A harmless, sensible, smiling mask men slide between the 2 great dark realities, the self and the world. 2 snake pits. The watchful mind lies, cunning and swift about the dark blood's lust, lies and lies and lies, until, weary of talk, the watchman sleeps. Then, sudden and swift, the enemy strikes from nowhere, the cavernous heart. Violence is truth, as the crazy old peasant told Hrothulf. But the old fool only half grasped what he said. He had never conversed with a dragon. And the stranger? Afraid or not, I would go to the mead hall, I knew. I toyed, of course, with the ridiculous theory that I'd stay where I was safe, like a sensible beast. Am I not free? As free as a bird? I whispered, leering, maniacal. I have seen, I embody, the vision of the dragon. Absolute, final waste. I saw long ago the whole universe as not my mother, and I glimpsed my place in it, a whole. Yet I exist, I knew. Then I alone exist, I said. It's me or it. What glee, that glorious recognition. The cave, my cave, is a jealous cave. For even my mamma loves me not for myself, my holy specialness, he-he-ho-ha, but for my sonness, my possessedness, my displacement of air as visible proof of her power. I have set her aside, gently, picking her up by the armpits as I would a child, and so have proved that she has no power but the little I give her by momentary whim. So I might set aside Hrothgar's whole kingdom, and all his thanes, if I did not, for sweet desire's sake, set limits to desire. If I murdered the last of the Scyldings, what would I live for? I'd have to move. So now, for once unsure of victory, I might set limits to desire, go to sleep, put off further raids till the Geats go home. For the world is divided, experience teaches, into two parts: things to be murdered, and things that would hinder the murder of things. And the Geats might reasonably be defined either way. So I whispered, wading through drifts waist-high, inexorably on my way to Hrothgar's mead hall. Darkness lay over the world like a coffin lid. I hurried. It would be a shame to miss the boasting. I came to the hall, bent down at my chink, peered in. The wind was shrill, full of patterns. It was a scene to warm the cockles of your heart. The Danes were not pleased, to say the least, that the Geats had come to save them. Honor is very big with them. They'd rather be eaten alive than be bailed out by strangers. The priests weren't happy either. They'd been saying for years that the ghostly destroyer would take care of things in time. Now here were these foreigner upstarts unmasking religion. My old friend Orc sat shaking his head in dismay, saying nothing, brooding, no doubt, on the dark metaphysical implications. Things fade. Alternatives exclude. Whichever of us might exclude the other, when the time came for me and the stranger to meet, the eyes of the people would be drawn to the instance. They would fail to rise to the holy idea of process. Theology does not thrive in the world of action and reaction. Change, it grows on calm like the scum on a stagnant pool. And it flourishes, it prospers, on decline. Only in a world where everything is patently being lost can a priest stir men's hearts as a poet would by maintaining that nothing is in vain. For old time's sake, for the old priest's honor, I would have to kill the stranger, and for the honor of Hrothgar's thanes. The Danes sat sulking, watching the strangers eat, wishing some one of them would give them an excuse to use their daggers. I covered my mouth to keep from cackling. The king presided, solemn and irritable. He knew that his thanes couldn't handle me alone, and he was too old and tired to be much impressed, however useful it might be to his kingdom, by their fathead ideas of honor. Get through the meal, that's the thing, he was thinking. Keep them from wasting their much-touted skills on one another. The queen wasn't present, situation much too touchy. Then up spoke Unferth, Edglaf's son, top man in Hrothgar's hall. He had a nose like a black, deformed potato, eyes like a couple of fangs. He leaned forward over the table and pointed the dagger he'd been eating with. "Say, friend," he said to the beardless leader of the Geats, "are you the same man that went swimming that time with young Breca? Risked your lives in the middle of the winter for nothing, for a crazy mead boast?" The stranger stopped eating, smiled. "We heard about that," Unferth said. "Nobody could stop you. Kings, priests, counsellors, nobody. Splash! Unferth made swimming motions, eyes rolled up, mouth gasping. The thanes around him laughed. The sea boiled with waves, fierce winter swells. 7 nights you swam, so people say. He made his face credulous, and the Danes laughed again. And at last Breca beat you, much stronger than you were. He proved his boast against you, for what it may be worth. The Danish thanes laughed. Even Hrothgar smiled. Unferth grew serious. And now only the stranger went on smiling, he alone and the huge Geats next to him, patient as timber wolves. Unferth pointed with his dagger, giving friendly advice. I predict it will go even worse for you tonight. You may have had successes, I haven't heard. But wait up for Grendel, for 1 night's space, and all your glorious successes will be done with. The Danes applauded. The stranger smiled on, his downward slanting eyes like empty pits. I could see his mind working, stone-cold, grinding like a mill-wheel. When the hall was still, he spoke, soft-voiced, his weird gaze focused nowhere. Ah, friend Unferth, drunk with mead, you've said a good deal about Breca. The truth is, nevertheless, that I beat him. I'm stronger in the ocean than any other man alive. Like foolish boys we agreed on the match and boasted, yes, we were both very young, swore we'd risk our lives in the sea, and did so. We took swords with us, swimming one-handed, to fight off whales. Unferth laughed, and the others followed, as was right. It was preposterous. The stranger said, Breca couldn't swim away from me for all his strength. A man with arms like yours, friend Unferth. And as for myself, I chose not to swim away from him. Thus we swam for 5 nights, and then a storm came up, icy wind from the north, black sky, raging waves, and we were separated. The turmoil stirred up the sea monsters. One of them attacked me, dragged me down to the bottom where the weight of the sea would have crushed any other man. But it was granted to me that I might kill him with my sword, which same I did. Then others attacked. They pressed me hard. I killed them, 9 old water-knickers, robbed them of the feast they expected at the bottom of the sea. In the morning, sword ripped, they lay belly up near shore. They'd trouble no more passing sailors after that. Light came from the east, and behold, I saw headlands, and I swam to them. Fate often enough will spare a man if his courage holds. Now the Danes weren't laughing. The stranger said it all so calmly, so softly, that it was impossible to laugh. He believed every word he said. I understood at last the look in his eyes.